here today to put on a webinar that we've been tasked with by the Banking and Cash Management Committee, of which I'm the Vice Chair, and it's on changing your banking relationship. Here in Kentucky, we have had as our custodial bank, or we did have as our custodial bank, the same bank, a local bank, for almost 90 years up until 2010. We would let a contract, as we're required to by law on a periodic basis, but it was kind of a formality. They were so entrenched into our network and into our system that it was going to be very, very difficult for anybody ever to uproot them. But in 2010, we decided we needed to reach out and see how we might improve services here in Kentucky, because we need to pull ourselves into the 21st century. And so we really opened it up and encouraged some larger banks to participate in the RFP process. In so doing, we learned a whole bunch, and essentially, in a nutshell, what we learned was that we were kind of flying blind. We had a template that had been put together for us back in the 80s, but we reached out to other states to see if they'd had recent experience changing their banking relationship, and we, in Kentucky, do it by committee. So we had everybody that was intricately involved in our finance and monetary system involved, the revenue cabinet, the finance cabinet, of course, Treasury. And as many of you know, Treasury is one of those offices where when everything is working seamlessly, when everything's working right, nobody really notices, and that's the way it ought to be. But whenever the smallest thing goes wrong, everybody notices. So getting the banking contract and the banking relationship right is as critical to the smooth functioning of state government as any vendor or service contract that any state lets. And so we decided that it might be good to just kind of do a little bit of a case study and talk about our experience. And that's what we're gathered here today to do. Now, in the RFP process, although your relationship with your custodial banking partner is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship, and we are working very, very closely and very well with our banking partner, that would be J.P. Morgan Chase, the RFP process is a little bit different. It's a little bit more of an adversarial process, because the banks who are responding to the RFPs, after all, they're for-profit enterprises, and we're not. We're trying to get the best deal for the people of Kentucky, and the banks are trying to get the best deal for their enterprise and their shareholders. So one of the things that we decided that we should focus on was not only the process, but what we've learned since. And we also want to announce that we are going to, through NAST, be putting together a resource bank so that any states looking to go through this process in the future will have someplace they can go to see contracts and templates and things that other states have done. Now, we are stocking it with documents from our experience. We're going to be sending out a formal request to other states that go through the process to see if they will provide us with their documents so that you can have a whole resource available to you, kind of in library format, so that nobody else has to go through this process flying blind as we did. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to Corey Donnelly. He's the State Debt Management Network Association Director with NAST.
Thank you, Treasurer. I appreciate that. This is Corey Donnelly. This webinar is shown over the GoToWebinar platform, and at the end of the presentation and a brief review of the document repository, we will have a Q&A session. If you have a question, there are two ways to ask them. One is to virtually raise your hand, and to do that, you would click on the hand icon, which is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, which is part of your GoToWebinar platform. If you do that, we will know that you have a question, and during the Q&A, we will unmute your phone and ask you to ask your question. The other way would be to type in your question as part of the question dialog box, also part of the GoToWebinar platform. If you have questions at any time, type those into the question dialog box so that we know you have them. Once you type that in, we will ask those questions also during the Q&A session. Thank you, Treasurer.
Thank you, Corey. The two men who we have here with us today that are going to be leading us through this process, I refer to them as my brain trust. They were as close to and intricately involved in the changeover to our new banking partner as anybody in state government. The Assistant State Treasurer, Eugene Harrell, is here with us. Gene is Treasury's primary contact for any banking issue. He's been with Kentucky State Treasury for approximately 33 years now. He's participated in many banking service RFP and evaluation committees, including the 2010 committee, which led to the change in providers from Farmers Bank to J.P. Morgan Chase. He knows all of Kentucky's banking secrets. Also presenting today is Mr. Jonathan Eakin. He's a financial analyst with the Office of Financial Management. Jonathan is the primary contact manager and day-to-day operations manager for the Commonwealth Depository and Correspondent Banks. He also plays a key role in the Commonwealth investments and bond transactions. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Treasurer Hollenbach. I want to spend just a few minutes discussing where we were. The Treasurer has given you a little background about the history of our banking situation, but I want to spend just a few minutes telling you where we were and how far we had to come to see how well this relates to your particular situation. As Treasurer Hollenbach said, Kentucky had the same bank for at least 85 years and possibly over 100 years. This occurred because of restrictive banking legislation. For many decades, there was no cross-county banking allowed in Kentucky. And even after those banking laws changed, just the necessity of multiple deposit pickups and of delivery of canceled checks made it so much easier to have a local bank to perform our banking services. Until the 1980s, the Treasurer and the Finance Secretary actually selected the bank themselves. But in the early 1980s, Kentucky decided to place the awarding of banking services under the Commonwealth's Model Procurement Code. And when that decision was made and the contractors moved to a competitive bidding situation, Kentucky brought in an accounting firm to do a comprehensive cash management study. And the main work product of that study was a new banking structure for the state and the first model banking RFP. I guess is actually our first modern banking RFP. And that basically has been the structure of our RFP since that time. Even with the competitive bidding, our historical bank continued to get the contract because they had a clear advantage over everyone else. They understood the needs of the Commonwealth better. They had been involved in constructing most of the processes, and they were here, so they could pick up deposits, they could deliver checks. They just had a huge advantage over any other bidder, and they did provide a wonderful service. We were their largest customer, and they would do anything we needed to get our job done. So they tailored their systems to fit our needs. So along the way, they developed a lot of unique systems for us, which worked very, very effectively. But although it was wonderful service, this also provided the basis for a very large shock for us when we left our sheltered environment and began dealing with the truly national and international banking institutions. One thing that occurred probably about 8 or 10 years ago had a major impact on our processes too. Throughout these early years, our local bank was both our operations bank and our custodial bank. We just had the one banking contract for all services. So in reality, our local bank just subcontracted the custodial functions to the New York banks. And so the situation developed where the New York banks were performing our custody activities, but they worked for our bank and they didn't work for us. We had no direct contractual relationship with them. So it was determined that that obviously wasn't a really good situation. So about 8 or 10 years ago, the decision was made to to separate the contracts. So now we issue two contracts. We issue the banking services contract and we issue a custodial contract. So this brought us to 2010 and the issuing of our new banking services contract. And in 2010, the banking situation had changed totally. It was just a completely different environment. Check 21 had removed the requirement for delivery of canceled checks. The electronic check scanning removed the need for multiple daily pickups. And then our splitting of our contract changed the situation with our local bank, where they lost a lot of their assets. So actually at that point they weren't really large enough to perform a lot of the duties that we needed done on the daily basis, such as ACH and Fedwire transactions. So it was a completely different environment than we had ever seen before. So going into our RFP situation, we issued a new RFP in October of 2010. And one of the first lessons that we learned in that process was how much the banking world had changed. We really had been in somewhat of a sheltered environment, and we didn't know a lot of the stuff that was going on in the banking world. So as Treasurer said, we reached out to a lot of different states to see what was going on. We also reached out to all the state agency involved to get their input, and we incorporated them into the planning of the RFP, and also we put them on the evaluation committee. I think we did a really good job on reaching out, but I think one of the lessons that we learned is that in choosing the evaluation committee, we didn't weight those properly to the major users of the services. So this is one of our lessons, which I think is valuable to pass on to other people. It's good to get input, but it's also good to have the final decisions being weighted toward those who are actually most involved in the process. So something that I would recommend to any other state entering this process. In our RFP that we sent out, there were two elements for evaluation. There was a technical evaluation that was done by the evaluation committee. Then there was a pricing evaluation that was done by the state's Office of Procurement Services. The technical evaluation committee had no idea what the prices were. We never saw that until the technical evaluation was made. So, and then if there was a need for it, there would be an additional evaluation for any kind of oral presentation that would be made. So all these components together contributed to our final score. In our RFP, since we weren't real familiar with this new world out there, we described a lot of our current services and our perceived needs. We described a lot of the things that we were doing in very precise detail, assuming that we would be able to get the same type of data coming in that we had been used to working with. And this was probably our next lesson that we learned in that process. In the end, we'll ultimately adjust our processes to what the bank offers rather than having the bank adjust their processes to what we say we need. This was kind of a shock to us since we hadn't been involved in this and we've been using a very customized system. But it was at this point that we really began to realize that how many special services that our bank had been doing for us, a lot of things that we didn't really realize that were being done behind the scenes. And it was also at this point that we began to realize that we were going to be involved in some pretty significant changes in the banking process. The magnitude of the changes became really important in our timing. Our RFP was issued in October, on October 14th of 2010, solicitation closed on October 22nd, and the start date of the contract was July 1st. It sounded like plenty of time based on our past experiences, but as it turned out, we did not allow enough time for ourselves in this process. So this is something that I think is really, really critical to people in going into the RFP and planning their transition. The transition, probably from the bank's point of view, was not a big deal. They'd gone through this many, many times before. But from our point of view, in looking at major system change, it was just a tremendous undertaking. I think in our RFP, we probably dropped the ball pretty much in planning for this. I think this was a deficiency in our RFP that will correct this next time. We asked the bank to give us their transition plan. We did not take into account what we would need to make that transition because we didn't really realize the magnitude of the change that it would bring on our office. It was there was really not much provision in our RFP to call for a test environment. We didn't ask for their plans for providing a test environment. Our technical people tell me they needed a playground to play in for several months ahead of time. That wasn't available. We kept asking our bank to start the process of transition, but as I said, from their point of view, it wasn't a big deal, so the transition actually didn't start until just a few weeks before July 1st. As it turned out, with the magnitude of the impact on our systems, this really wasn't enough time for us to be ready on July 1st. We faced a couple of major issues in the transition. Our biggest problem was in reconciliation and reporting. Over the span of years, we developed a very automated, very customized system with our bank, which really worked great. They would upload our bank data each day to a secure FTP site, and we would go in and download that straight into our reconciliation system, and it was all pretty automatic. So we were working under the assumption, and I guess it was a naive assumption, that we would probably have this same type of apparatus available to us. We kept pushing for this, and we kept pushing for this, and we finally did get this same type of operation, which we implemented on July 1st. We didn't realize at the time how much that operation was costing us. We looked at first of all, the first bank bills were a little confusing, so we weren't sure at that point how we were being charged for different activities. So we finally realized that this file that we had insisted that the bank provide for us was costing us $20,000 a month. So it didn't take us very long to realize that that's not something that we could sustain over the long term. So we had to begin looking for other ways to get the data that we needed. So then we had to go into the systems that the bank automatically provided and start using their data and their systems to get the daily information that we needed. It was really a step backwards for us from what we had been doing. It was a lot more manual. There was a lot more human intervention. There was a whole lot more prone to error, but it was a system that we were going to have to learn to use, and we began learning to use that. But this was after the banking contract was in effect, so that was something that we learned the hard way, that you need to sort out all these things and have a clear understanding of where you're getting your data beforehand. Another issue that we had is in our deposit process. in Kentucky, the deposit process was handled in two different offices. The Department of Revenue has a very large-scale remittance processing system that they use to handle most of the taxes and the unemployment insurance tax. Then all other agencies deposit through our office. And the Department of Revenue uses an image cash letter file that they transmit to the bank, and the Treasury uses a desktop scanners that we scan the data and send to the bank. Well, the system that we had been using was really very efficient. Our former bank had set us up as one of their, in the same system that their different branches had. So we had very effective, high-speed, accurate, dependable scanners. We would scan checks, and then at the end of the day, we would transmit a file to the bank, and that file would go into the banking system. Our new bank set us up as an individual customer, just like a merchant downtown would use the system. We again had desktop scanners, but they were a lot slower, and this was an online system, went out over the internet. Each item was transmitted over the internet. So it just caused us a nightmare. This particular system was not built for the kind of volumes that we were using. We tinkered with this for months. We had conferences with the state technology people. They lived in our office for about a week. The bank technology people were constantly on the phone. We tinkered with it and tinkered with it, but still did not make very much progress. It was just a slower system that wasn't built for the kind of volumes that we're having to deal with. The state was in the process of upgrading its infrastructure, and they increased the bandwidth, and at that point our system began working a little bit better because it became obvious that we didn't have adequate bandwidth to make these transmissions. But we went through almost 2 years of this, two tax seasons when the deposits got backed up. We actually had to hire an additional person because this system was so much slower than what we've been using. And then during our peak periods, we had to bring people in from all over the office. So it was a real surprise for us, and I think the slide said bigger is not always better. We, working with one of the major international banks, we would expected a much more modern and much faster system than we'd been used to using with our little small town bank, but that was not the case. So that was a real eye-opener for us. One thing that we learned through the process is in our day-to-day operations, the role of the customer service representative is key. We're a pretty high maintenance customer for our bank, as I'm sure any state would be, because of the variety of processes in which we're involved. So we're in constant communication with our banking partners. We're in our 5th year of this contract now, and through the preceding 4 years, we've dealt with a number of customer service representatives with varying degrees of success. But finally, within the last few months, our bank has provided us with somebody that we consider a superstar. And we are getting more done. We've got more done in the last few months than we had in almost the 3.5 or 4 years prior to that. Our current representative is a 30-plus year employee of the bank. She's been with the bank long enough to understand what the processes should be. She's been there long enough to know that when she's being told things from her own banking side that she knows it isn't right, so she can challenge it and get the right answers for us. So entering our 5th year of the contract, we're just now beginning to get the answers to some of the issues that we had since day one. So it's been great for us, and it's something that I would certainly encourage anyone going into this process to make sure of the the bank customer service representative and make sure you're getting the best person that they have to offer. And I think in this case we have that now. We're learning every day about how the system works. Problem is the bank keeps changing the system and upgrading, so we're relearning a lot of things, but there hopefully are improvements. One thing that's helped us a lot is we schedule a monthly meeting with the bank representatives and the finance cabinet and our office get together, and all the technical representatives from the bank get on the phone, and we work through any issues that are still on the table or anything that has just come up. This has helped us a whole lot in working through some of the issues that we have faced. In summarizing our transition, as I say, we're in the 5th year of our contract, and we're preparing to reissue our next RFP. Our banking contracts are issued for 2 years with two-year possibilities for renewal. So every 6 years we go through this process. So in our 5th year, we're still dealing with many of the issues which we experienced immediately. And it's only very recently with the arrival of our new customer service representative that we're beginning to get some of these issues resolved. In the past 4 years, we've had to learn how to use many of the materials that the bank provides. It's a constant learning process, and it probably will be for as long as we're working with this bank or with any bank. In this process, we've moved from a very customized system that had developed in our relationship with our bank of 85 years to a much more off-the-shelf turnkey system that uses more standardized technologies and procedures. It's been a very slow and somewhat painful process, but it's been filled with a lot of frustrations. But in the process, I think we're probably better prepared should we change banks again in the future. One thing that I think is real important is during our negotiation with our new bank, because there's so much uncertainty about the various charges and how their charges were structured, we negotiated a ceiling on charges for the first 2 years. Their billing would not exceed a certain amount until we got a better handle on how we were going to be billed. And that's certainly something that I would recommend that anybody going into this process try to include that in their negotiations. It turned out to be a lifesaver for us. I'm going to now turn it over to Jonathan Aiken, who manages the bank contract on a day-to-day basis. He's also the person in charge with putting together our new RFP, so he can shed some information on the issues that he still deals with on a daily basis.
Thanks, Eugene. Good afternoon, everyone. Quickly like to look at some of our current considerations that we deal with on a daily basis now that we're with Chase, and then we'll move into what we're going to look at for our state is we move into the next RFP here in the fall. I'm going to start crafting the next RFP, and then what we would look for if we did in fact have to switch banks again. So for our current considerations, as Eugene said, I am the day-to-day contact. So when we originally switched from Farmers Bank to Chase, during that transition, we had a point of contact where everything funneled through, so they could get a better handle on the processes that we were using in that single point of contact. I took on that role almost 2 years ago. I was a daily user of the contract before that. Then I moved into handling the billing and the day-to-day. I'm the main security administrator for the web-based system for J.P. Morgan. And as we go through that, I've learned a lot very quickly in the last 2 years. Things you have to stay on top of, as Eugene mentioned, are the software updates. And that's something we're going to have to deal with forever now, as we've moved into such a technological age that every system is going to have upgrades. One of the things we had to be careful of was JP Morgan's system requires a certain version of Java. It requires a certain version of Adobe. Your browser has to be a certain version. And in some cases, we had to actually go backwards for some of our users as they were spread around the state, that they were actually further along in their versions of software than what was required by JP Morgan Access. And we had to go backward and uninstall and put an older version in. So that's something that we had to think about. And recently, XP quit the support for Microsoft XP, sunsetted, and so that changed the browser and the system that a lot of people had to use for our banking system. I also handle any new accounts. Our accounts are pretty set overall, but every once in a while we'll have a new Impress Cash account that needs to be open. A lot of user changes, people that get added and dropped. Market and industry changes are things that we're looking at now as we go. There is a large shift in the industry now in how they handle customers like states with larger balances. There is a lot of banks are actually moving away from mutual funds or hedge funds that keep really, really high balances because of the collateral issues that they have to deal with. They have to pledge a certain amount of cash. They have to buy treasuries, and these collateral changes are causing the banks and the banking industry as a whole to look at different avenues, and that's something that we've had to look at too, and it's going to go into our next RFP is the collateral consideration. We've had to look at lines of credit and different things like that as we move forward. Deal with bank personnel changes. The three primary people I started working with in the beginning of 2014 are all gone now. But like Eugene said, we've replaced them and are currently looking to develop a new relationship. And so that's just an ongoing situation that everybody's going to have to deal with. Also, new services and billing. Again, we're 4 years into this. We're into our last 2 years of the contract, and we are still adding services as they come up. And we added something about 6 months ago because of some notifications of change that we had to work out with JP Morgan. How that changes billing, how that hits our master agreement, a lot of those things that are constantly changing that we have to stay on top of. And one of the things that was out of sight, out of mind for me personally until now was system security and encryption. The magic decoder ring is what I call it for being able to send information from our agencies to JP Morgan and to receive their information. So they have a set of keys, or what they call PGP keys or SSH or SSH2 keys, where the information is scrambled and encoded, and then we have to have the updated set of keys to be able to read it. And if these expire, those are one of the things that it shuts the whole system down because the information cannot get from one entity to the next, and the banking stops. So it's a crucial piece, and it's very important to know who updates those keys within your technology department. For us, it's spread around, and it's been a challenge with the decentralization of the agencies for us to be able to find the people who update these keys has been a large part of what I've done for the past 6 months to make sure that nothing like that, where we don't have a failure where a key expires and the system blows up on a date. That's obviously not a good thing. So those are some of our current considerations. Again, for our RFP preparation that we're looking at moving forward, we are into the last 2 years of our contract with Chase. Right now, the timeline we're looking at, based on what Eugene mentioned, as far as what we learned for a transition period, looking to craft the RFP in the fall, get it out on the street in early spring, and would ideally like to have someone selected by next summer, even though our contract doesn't expire till the summer after that. That would give us a full calendar year of implementation time to be able to work out the kinks, to be able to contact all of the agencies and make sure that their needs are covered so that nothing is missed, so that when we go live a year later, it's as seamless as possible. Again, that's the plan, but I understand that there will be delays somewhere along the way, and it probably won't work out exactly as we planned, but that's the ideal situation. And so we have to prepare as if we are going to switch, and that's what this is all about. So again, on the RFP preparation, file testing is a huge thing. Can you send blank files to them? Or can you send files with dummy information or beta test files to them, and can they send files back to you with zero amounts that won't hit your system or affect your day-to-day processes? That's a huge piece to be able to move those files back and forth between the two systems. Again, we're in a much more turnkey situation now. As much as we had growing pains moving from our old depository bank to our new one, we are in a situation now where we have a list of treasury services that we use and billing for them, that if we switch to another bank, it would be very easy to say, well, here are the treasury services we use. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that on our last transition in 2010, and now we should be in a much better situation if that's the case. I know each state has different standards for where they want their branch location. So that's something else to think about if you're moving into an RFP and you haven't done one. Where are their branches? Does there have to be one in where in each city or each county? How can people cash their checks? Where do where checks need to be moved? How does that work? So that's something you want to think about. System requirements. If you're moving from one bank to another, again, it may switch completely. What versions of Java you need on your system? What versions of Adobe you need? And what browsers does it work best with? Somebody's system may work best with Internet Explorer, and somebody's may work best with Google Chrome. So that's the questions that you could ask about what are the requirements for because most everyone will have a web-based application now, and how does it change? Collateral, again, already touched on that briefly. It's a issue now because it's actually moving banks away from holding large deposits, as was the case for years and years. They wanted the large deposit bases, but now it's getting so expensive to hold those, they're moving away from it. So how will they collateralize it? We actually switched and started using a letter of credit through Federal Home Loan Bank, I believe is what it was. So that's one of those things that you might ask and find out too, to make sure that that's covered. Training was very important, obviously, for when we switched our systems for everyone. Especially the system looks so different, and we were a little bit behind the times technology-wise. So jumping to a bank that was up to date was a shock to some systems, and so we want to make sure that there is adequate training. Chase came in, set up classes for us, ran us through the basic stuff. Some people will need extensive training. Some will just need to be able to pull one single bank statement, and it's a fairly easy transition. But all change can cause heartburn, so you want to make sure that your downstream users are as comfortable as possible. So what is their training? How much training do they offer? Do they come on site? How often can they do it? Encryption, we touched on this. What are their encryption requirements? Because even for Chase, they are changing soon for us. The state is going to have to change the way that it's doing its encryption, or we'll be able to handle I believe, the encryption coming from J.P. Morgan. So, but that's coming up soon. What equipment? Scanners. Eugene here in Treasury, they use the scanners and where they take the check. So what kind of equipment can they offer? And then Armored Car and Courier was one we talked about from the original, that some will provide that for you in the contract, and some they won't, and you may have to set that up on your own. So you'll want to ask them, depending on your state's requirements, do we have to move checks, and how do we move the money to the actual branches? How is that actually going to happen? So again, as we move for the banking transition, as we prepare for this, let's say that for us, in our scenario, next summer Chase bids and doesn't get it, or they don't bid and we do have to move to another bank. Again, start with the employee training. We want to give them as much training as possible. We have roughly in one of our JP Morgan systems about 90 users. There's another system that I'm an administrator on. We have about another 30 users there. So out of the entire state of Kentucky, we've got about 120 users of some form of a JP Morgan system. So we want to make sure that all of those people are as comfortable as possible, they have as much training as possible as they're moving into this, to create a sense of ease for everyone. Know your bank transition team. They will most likely have a very specific team that can train everyone, that will give you websites that you can go to, specific people that you can call that can go and do this, walk people through, hold their hand, make them feel as knowledgeable as they can, and then move into the post-transition team. I know when we did our custody contract, which we touched on, I'm also involved with our custody contract. That was one of those things that we had a specific person who held our hand through that and then gracefully exited and left us to a completely different group of people as we move forward. So again, develop as good a relationships as you can. Relationships are key in this entire situation, that the better you know everyone that you're working with, the smoother this is going to go. I would suggest a central point of contact as much as possible. As much as I've done this for the last 2 years, we have tried to get spread the authority, move it back out to the agency, where we had gathered it all into one person. I have tried to push back out the decision making and the dealing with the bank back out to the agency. So my role has become more of an umbrella where you do your thing with the bank, but please keep me in the loop. And if there needs to be an escalation, then I become the point of contact and I'll deal with the bank. Almost I call myself a bridge. Eugene and I talk about this frequently. I consider myself a bridge between the agencies to the bank and the bank to the agency, and deal with those issues and billing and things like that. So on that bank transition, I would highly suggest that there is a person or a group that is able to see everything, so that there aren't things that are missed during that transition. Know who your security administrators are. It's probably going to be the same people that you have now. Depending on that, we have 5 security administrators for the state. We have a dual approval process within JP Morgan, and we have to have at least that many for who's there and who's not. Reporting changes. Again, we have homegrown systems. Find out how it's going to affect your homegrown systems. We depend on Access and Excel to do some of our stuff and how those reports pull down. So make sure that you understand how reports may change, as Eugene talked about. Check encryption changes. Again, I have time. Make sure you leave enough time for training and for errors. There are going to be bumps in the road. There are going to be errors that are made. There's going to be miscommunication between you and the bank. There's going to be something that's going to blow up somewhere that's going to cause a lot of heartache for a lot of people. But just expect it. Expect it as you go through, and make sure that this is one of those things. Stay positive. I know that sounds silly, but if the people responsible for the transition are as positive as possible, we know there's going to be bumps in the road on this. If you expect them and you can stay with it and keep positive at the top. It will say positive through your entire organization, and it will make this much smoother and a happier time for everyone as they're dealing with change, which is never easy. So those are some of the things that we're going to look at during the banking transition if it is necessary. I'm done with my section, so I'm going to turn it back over to Corey now and let him take it from here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Gene. Before I take us to a review of the documents from the Kentucky project, I'd like to remind everyone, if you have questions, to hit the hand icon at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, or to type those into your question dialog box as part of the GoToWebinar system. Give me just a second. I'll take us to the site. All right. So to view these documents, first you would want to visit the NAST website, which is nast.org. You would want to click on the member link, which is at the right portion of the screen. Once you get to the members section, you would log in using your work email and your password. We have reviewed how to access this site in a previous webinar. You can see that recording also at nast.org if you need a refresher. Once you've logged in, you would want to visit the Member Resources section, and you'd want to click on the Resources button. Once you do that, you'll come to our document repository that is titled Resources. You can search for documents using keywords. In this instance, quite a few keywords will get you to these documents, including bank billing, bank RFP, RFP Kentucky, banking services, and a handful of others. The idea is that we want, in the future, people that have projects like this to be able to easily find other examples from states that have done similar projects. So if I were to type in banking in the search box and hit search, it takes me to a list of documents that have that keyword included. And in this instance, the Kentucky Banking Relationship RFP document resource is one that comes up for that search. If I was to click on that, it takes me to the resource itself, which has a description here of the documents included, including the RFP itself, the Chase billing examples, as you can see, disbursements and counts, and we can add more to this in the future. This particular resource has been compressed into a zip file that if you were to download, you could open up with any Windows computer, and there are programs for Mac that will open it as well. It's a standard file type. So if you were to click the download resource, it would download here in your computer, and you could open up those documents, and it would be in PDF format here. So we encourage you all to visit this page, to look at these documents, use them for your future projects. But we'd also, to make this resource more valuable, we would encourage you, if you've had projects like this, to send your RFP documents to NAST. The easiest way to do that would be to send them to nast@statetreasurers.org. You can always call us at 859-721-2190. We'd be happy to help you get us those documents or answer questions about them in the future. So with that, I would like to turn the Q&A back over to the presenters. Thank you very much. Apologies, everyone. All right, very good. So if you all wouldn't mind giving me a moment to look over the questions, we do have a couple here. The first question was there a part of the RFP that included assessing the safety and soundness of the candidate banks?
Yes, that was a critical part of the technical proposal. The technical proposal was divided into a number of different sections, but bank information was the first part of it, and of course this was shortly after the recession and all the TARP funding, so that was a major part of assessing the bank. The first thing that was looked at, in fact.
Great, thank you. So we do have another question. It says, looking back, it sounds like you did most, if not all, of the legwork yourself on your RFP. Do you wish you would have hired a firm to do this for you? And if yes, do you have anyone to suggest?
To my knowledge, there was never any thought about hiring a firm.
We did have a dedicated person that was specific. Was in my office at the time, and that was her primary and only role at that point, was to transition to the new bank. And so she did have to reach out to other states. So having a resource like this would have been invaluable to be able to go out to a document repository or have other similar, state agencies that we could reach out to. She did that informally on her own, and was able to figure it out. Now we do have a template that we use from our procurement office. That's part of what we have to do, and then we have to stick to a certain form for us, but then we can expand on that from the experience. So we were able to do it without a firm. I wouldn't have, personally, I don't know someone to recommend for that.
Thank you. We do have another question. It is, do you have any insights on how you managed access to or archiving of historical banking data, such as images and transaction history from the prior bank?
We did have a lot of our billing records from the bank, which helped us somewhat. We maintained a transaction record of a lot of the transactions that we did that we were able to go back to. We had them for quite a few years back, in fact. So we're sort of an office that doesn't throw a whole lot away. So we did manage to retrieve those from our own files in most parts.
Thank you, Gene. We have a follow-up to the previous question about a designated person. So the dedicated person, it was her full-time job then, due to the amount of work and complications of the process?
Yes, that was. We knew this was going to be a large job to tackle, so it was her primary responsibility through that entire transition. And once it was done, she took on extra responsibilities at that point. So she did have a little help. I mean, she did have other people helping her and chiming in, but for the most part, she was the primary one, and it was her only role at the time.
Perfect. And we do have one more question. Has there been any thought to designate more than one bank?
Actually, that has come up. Someone brought that up to me within the last 6 months about having what they deemed as a backup bank in case the first one didn't work. The theory of that is a good theory. Unfortunately, as we've talked about with the file transfer issues, training on the web services, the web portals, all of the contacts and everything, being able to switch quickly from one bank to another, who would handle what, having two different, the logistics of that would be extremely difficult to pull off. Now, it's something we have not researched very far. It was just a discussion that I did have with someone. But I'm at this point with the encryption issues, the file sending, the day-to-day issues, which bank would handle what, how would that work with, reconciliation. That would give us, since we have a separate custody bank, that would give us 3 banks that we would deal with in our area. So it's not, again, great in theory, very difficult in reality in our situation.
Thank you very much. We don't have any more questions at this time. We'll turn it back over to Treasurer Hollenbach.
Thank you, Corey. I want to say for the record that, in my opinion, Chase Bank is as good a bank as there is out there. Most of the bumps and bruises we sustained came from not being prescient enough to look ahead and anticipate everything that we needed to anticipate. And the purpose of this webinar is to make it a little bit easier to shine a light so that any other states that are contemplating going through this process will be able to anticipate things that we didn't but have since learned we should have. The data bank that NAST is going to be maintaining is something for which we will be sending out a formal request to other states to provide their documents so that we can grow that database, and hopefully there'll be something there that any state, no matter what processes they're interested in, can look at and learn from. I want to thank Treasurer Lillard for his leadership and Treasurer McCoy, the chairman of my committee, Banking and Cash Management, for his support making this webinar possible. We hope it's been helpful, and with that, we'll sign off. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.